Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this remote meeting of the North and East Plans panel. My name is Councillor Kevin Ritchie and I will be chairing today's meeting. The North and East Plans panel deals with applications from the North East and East of the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. I would like to start the meeting today by confirming that this meeting of the North and East Plans panel meets the requirements of the council's constitution, even though members of the panel are in remote attendance. While items today will be fully discussed as is usual, remote attendance requires a few slight changes as to how I manage the debate. Therefore, can all attendees mute their microphone unless I invite them to speak? This will avoid disruption from background noise. Can all participants please keep their cameras on during the meeting? However, just for members of the public, if connectivity issues may mean that the videos can't be shown, and you can assume if that's the case, that's why the members aren't on view. All participants will be invited to introduce themselves at the start of the public session to make it clear to public observers who will be involved in proceedings. And members wishing to ask questions or make comments should do so by using the raised hand facility. When requesting your vote, I intend to go systematically around each panel member asking how they wish to vote. And I ask for your assistance and patience while I go through this process. So in order to avoid any disruption to the meeting, should I lose my internet connectivity, I propose that we appoint a deputy chair who could step up during my absence. And I move that Councillor David Jenkins and invite another member to second that motion to be deputy chair.
Second.
Second, thank you, Councillor Smith. And I'll take a vote by assuming your silence as approval. That seems to be the case. So thank you, Councillor Jenkins, for that. So we'll start by introductions through members and officers, and please mute your microphone once you've introduced yourself. First of all, Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Schemelt.
Councillor Jackie Shemelt, Horsforth Ward. I'm actually subbing for Councillor Dawn Collins today.
Okay, welcome and thank you. Councillor Jenkins.
Councillor David Jenkins, Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Councillor Midgley.
Good afternoon, Councillor Morel Midgley, Kippax and Methley Ward.
Councillor Nash, I don't think has joined us yet, but I believe he's trying to connect. So we'll just skip over Councillor Nash for now. Councillor Sharp.
Good afternoon, Councillor Nicole Sharp, Temple News and Ward.
Councillor Smith.
Good afternoon, Councillor Trish Smith, Pudgey Ward.
Thank you. And Councillor Heselwood.
Okay, Councillor Julia Heselwood.
Thank you, Councillor Heselwood. I think you're having trouble with your mute button. And right, thank you. On to the officers. Jonathan, please.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Welcome. David Newbury.
Good afternoon, David Newbury. I'm the Lead Planning Officer for the Plans Panel.
Okay, I don't think we have David Jones or Adam today, do we? Lisa Brannan.
Hi, I'm Lisa Brannan, Principal Engineer, Highways.
And I think we've got Philippa as legal, did I see?
Yeah, Philippa Plumtree Valley, Principal Legal Officer and Lead Legal Advisor to the panel today. And in the event that my internet connection fails, I'm supported by my colleague, Matthew Hills.
Okay, thank you. Glenn Allen.
Good afternoon, Glenn Allen, Principal Planning Officer for the North East of Leeds, and presenting the substantive item on the agenda this afternoon.
Thank you. And Debbie.
Hi, I'm Debbie Oldham. I'm from Governance Services and I'm clerk to the panel. And can I just say, Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Nash has just been in touch with me. She is still trying to get onto the call. We've made a suggestion she turns off a VPN, so hopefully she will be joining us shortly.
Okay, thanks for that. And there are a few other officers on the line who are helping with various technical matters and what have you, so welcome to those as well. Okay, so we move on to the agenda. So under move through, Debbie, please, items 1 to 5.
Thank you. Under agenda item 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there's no exempt items. Agenda item 3, there's no late items. Agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests? I'll take silence as there are none. And agenda item 5, we have received apologies from Councillor Almas and Councillor Collins, and substituting for them today are Councillor Shemmelt and also Councillor Heselwood. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and a warm welcome to both Councillor Heselwood and Councillor Shemmelt for subbing today. Right, on to agenda item 6, which is the minutes of the previous meeting from the 3rd of December. So do members accept these minutes as a true and correct record, and then we'll do matters arising. I'll assume correct unless I hear otherwise. So I see no hands, so I'll take those as a correct record. Are there any matters arising, members? Again, Councillor Jenkins.
Yes, just on out of interest in a way, on item 45, the land off the Rowans, because of all the heavy rain yesterday. I just had a look at the flood map from the Environment Agency, which shows that the area concerned is under flood alert. So flooding as possible, be prepared. So I just thought I've sent a copy to the link to David Newbury and yourself. And it just might be worth drawing attention to people, because it does say that it's a sort of flooding alert 1 in 1,000, I think, in a lifetime. So just to make people aware. Thank you.
Okay, David, do you want to just comment on that? David Newbury?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, I recall that part of the site, small part of the site, was affected by flood zone 2, which means that it is liable to flood, but it's that part of the site which was unaffected by the built development. But yes, I'll have a thank you, Councillor Jenkins. I'll have a look at the link, and I'll also have a chat with my wife about it, because she works for the Environment Agency, so I might be able to get a little bit more information that way too.
Excellent, thank you, and thank you for raising it, Councillor Jenkins. Right, anything else from anybody? I see no other hands. So we move on to our substantive agenda item number 7, which is the demolition of the existing building and construction of a 2-storey dwelling on Sandmore Drive. So I think Glenn Allen is going to present the report. So welcome, Glenn, and when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could have the presentation off, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, this is, from our point of view, a relatively straightforward proposal for the demolition of the existing house on the site and its replacement with a more modern designed, up-to-date dwelling at 33 Sandmore Drive. I'll go through the presentation first, because I think what we've got on the presentation, if you could move the slide forward, please, I'll largely describe the proposal and what our views are on it. All the details that members have got available to them are in the report. The site, apologies for the quality of this slide. For some reason it seems to have got a bit distorted in the translation, but the site is the grey roofed structure that's pretty much in the centre of the building there. And I think it's important to point out initially that the footprint of the proposed replacement building is very similar to the footprint of the building that's on that slide members can see, except it does project backwards slightly. But as members will see from the drawings when we get to them, the area of land that the site, the development tries to cover within the site is not substantively larger than what's already been classed as developed land. So we don't have any principal issues with the encroachment into previously undeveloped land on this particular case. If you could move the slide forward again, please. We've got a series of photographs doing things a little bit the other way around this time, rather than showing the drawings first, just so members get a feel for the location and the area, given that we haven't been able to undertake a group site visit on this. This is generally the green leafy suburban character of this part of Alwoodley and Alwoodley Lane. If we could move the slide forward, please. We've got a number of slides which show the application site in that kind of context and some of the neighbours. And again, we've provided these so that members will have a feel for what the character of the area, which is largely large dwellings within relatively large plots. If we could move the next slide, please. This is the actual building that's on the site at the moment. Members can see, not an unattractive building, is of its age. If we could move forward, please. Lawn frontage. The benefit of this slide is that members will be able to see, again, in the absence of being able to undertake a site visit, the relationship of the frontage of the building to the trees which are on the frontage. If you imagine standing there, the belt of trees to the right-hand side, which are just off shot, are the trees that largely screen this development site from Alwoodley Lane. And the trees that are in the distance in the centre of the shot are the little coppice of trees that exist on the junction of the application site and Alwoodley Lane at Sadmore. So again, hopefully these pictures will give members an idea of the relationship of the building to where the trees are, which we have sought to protect as much as is possible. If we could move to the next slide, please. Again, this is the rear of the plot. The trees are a little bit closer, as you can see there. In the distance on the left-hand side of the picture, we have some canopy spread going over onto the roof there. But again, as I say, the proposal is largely in the same footprint area as this one. If we could move to the next slide, please. Another shot of the rear of the property. If we could move to the next slide. Believe that's the shot from the rear garden to the neighbour that actually fronts onto Alwoodley Lane, the property that's perpendicular to it. So if you imagine to the right-hand side of that property is the copse of trees that sit at the junction of Sandmoor and Alwoodley Lane. If you could move to the next slide, please. These are some of the neighbouring properties. You can see quite large, wide plots. Next slide. Another example in the immediate location of one of the houses in the location. Next slide, please. Another example in the immediate location. Next slide, please. Yet another example of, looks like a recently constructed one. And members will note these last few examples, the amount of vegetation that's on the frontage is substantially less than what's on the frontage of the application site. Could move to the next slide, please. Another example. Next slide. Right, so here you can see the site location. To the top of this site there, you can see the piece of land which like forms the L shape of the plot, where the copse of trees are, and the property that sort of centre to the top is the property that we saw in that photograph that was looking over the hedge, to give context for members to be able to understand the relationship there of the application site and then what is arguably the nearest neighbour. Next slide, please. The tree coverage indication on the site as it stands at the moment. Next slide, please. Now here we in fact, could you move on to the next one, because I think the next one's actually more beneficial for the needs of members. What we have here is, by way of comparison, members will be aware from the content of the report that there has been a history on the site, and the pinky purple outline there, which is probably a bit difficult for members to see from the key at the top right hand corner, is the outline of the scheme that was previously approved at appeal for 3 apartments on this site. And the orange outline is the outline of the footprint of the application site that is under consideration at the moment. So as you can see, there's some areas where it's larger, there's some areas where it's slightly smaller than what was previously approved on the site. And again, that's just to give members an idea of what has been considered appropriate for the site previously compared to what's being considered for the site at the moment. If you could move to the next slide, please. This is a slide from the tree report that's been submitted. Shows the root protection zones and the areas that are going to be protected should planning permission be forthcoming under the conditions, in order that the trees on the frontage and in that copse to the top of the drawing, and the other trees around the boundaries of the site, most of which are covered by a tree preservation order, are actually going to be preserved. The proposal will result in the loss of 3 trees. We've run them past the trees officer. He's had a good look at the report and had a look at the quality of the trees. And notwithstanding that it does result in the loss of 3, the trees officer is quite content that they are trees which are of no real amenity value in the wider context, but also trees that on the scale of it are acceptable to be lost from that point of view. But as members can see, we're seeking to achieve the maximum retention that is possible for the site to be redeveloped. Could we move to the next slide, please? Again, that's just another tree coverage plan. The red circle at top centre there indicates, I believe, one of the trees to be removed. So from a purely amenity point of view, as members can appreciate, there won't actually be any loss to the wider public, because it's simply a tree that will not be seen. Could move to the next slide, please. Now, again, this is another useful slide, hopefully for members. What we've got here is various outlines, and if you just bear with me, the red outline indicates the outline of the existing house. So as you can see, the other 2 outlines, which are the purple and orange, are slightly taller, but not significantly taller. The purple outline is the outline of the approved apartment scheme, and then the orange outline on that drawing is the proposed outline of the proposal that's before members. So there's slightly more bulk and massing compared to the approved apartment scheme before it. There's clearly more bulk and massing than the existing building on site. But the overall height of what had been previously approved on the site have been maintained as indicated by those outlines. Bear with me again to the end of the presentation now, just the drawing so members can see the general design principles that have gone into the dwelling. If you could move to the next slide, please. gabled frontages, accommodation in the roof space, not unusual in this part of the city. The rear has a slightly less complex design than the frontage, a little bit more glazing, arguably on the back there. But in the scale of things, overall, we consider a fairly coherent design. And the side elevations not showing a lot in order to protect the amenities of neighbours and things like that. If we could move to the next slide, please. These are showing the floor plans and the roofscape. Again, just to help members to put into context the various floors and spaces within them. And if we could move to the next slide, please. Slightly less cluttered elevations. Sorry, let me just. Yeah, I believe. Sorry, please forgive me. My thing's gone blurry on my screen. That the elevations of the previous scheme for comparison. And if we could move to the final slide, please. Again, just a comparative outline of the street elevation for the blocking of the street. So on the right is in the orange is the existing and proposed, and on the left in purple is the neighbour's property that actually fronts the Sandmoors as well. So we are recommending it for approval on the basis that the design is acceptable, the intensity of development is significantly less than the 3 apartments that were considered to be acceptable before. There is an increase in the bulk and massing of the property over and above the previous approval that was determined at appeal, but we're of the view as officers that that is not so significant a material as to justify refusal of this particular application, which is for a single dwelling house. Before I do pass back to you, Chair, I did neglect at the beginning of my presentation to point out that this is being reported to Plans Panel at the request of a local ward member to do with various issues that have been outlined in the report. We as officers felt that it was appropriate to report to Plans Panel as well, on the basis also that the history of the site, it's had a history where it has been reported to Plans Panel for the apartment development, and therefore consider it appropriate for determination by Plans Panel. Thank you, and back to you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Glenn, for that presentation. So we have no speakers either in support or against the application today. So with that, we move straight to questions to officers. Just before we do, just a welcome. I see Councillor Nash has joined us, so thanks, Councillor Nash. Councillor Jenkins has been elected as Deputy Chair in your absence. Hopefully we won't need his services.
I'm sorry about that, but never a true word. One should try to log in 10 minutes beforehand. I came about 2 minutes beforehand and found my computer wouldn't let me in. Anyway, I'm sorry about that.
Okay, I did notice you were here for the most part of that presentation, so I'm sure
yes.
you're able to get involved with the decision making. Excellent. So I see Councillor Anderson. Just to say, before Councillor Anderson comes in, Councillor Nash, we've got slight technical problems in that I'm not a co-host, so I'm having to manage the hands that I see through the participants list, so it may be a bit more difficult, so just bear with me. I'll endeavour to get people in the order I see them, but it may not be as smooth as normal. Is it normally smooth? I think so. I hope so. Okay then, Councillor Anderson first.
Thank you very much, Chair. 3 questions altogether. Now, I don't know whether Mr. Allen will be able to answer 2 of them, but on page 16 of our papers, it highlights the concerns that Councillor Buckley had in terms of that are issues before us today. One being the design of the scheme, and secondly, its potential impact on the street scene. Did Councillor Buckley meet with you and clearly set out what his concerns are, because in the presentation, and there was nothing wrong with the presentation, there was no reference to what those issues might have been and what issues he had. But if you weren't the officer he spoke to, then you're not necessarily going to know that information. And then the third question is the neighbourhood plan. It does say that there are various policies, I think 2 policies in the neighbourhood plan that need to be taken into account. Can you go over them as to what the neighbourhood plan says and why you are convinced that this is in compliance with the neighbourhood plan, please?
I'll mute myself. Yes, thank you for those, councillors. The request to go to plans panel came in via an email, via a letter, and I am certain that the case officer didn't actually meet or speak directly with the councillor on this. We had the request for it to go to plans panel quite early on, with the reasons given for it going to plans panel. And we've not had any negotiations or discussions with the ward councillor, with that particular ward councillor since, given that we've made the assumption that his concerns about design were to do with scale, bulk and massing, and the fact that it's a modern design compared to some of the more, what one might describe as traditional designs, albeit they're traditional in the sense that a lot of them are sort of art and crafts type era design. So it's obviously a debatable issue as to when you consider things to be modern and things to be traditional, which is one of the problems, of course, with the issues of design. In terms of the impact on the neighbourhood plan policies, and thank you for raising that, because obviously it is a very important aspect. The neighbourhood plan seeks to maintain the character of the area, and obviously we accept that as part of the development plan and as a material consideration that needs to be taken into account. And again, one of the issues that we've dealt with reasonably regularly in this part of Alwoodley, in terms of character, is to do with things like the plots changing from single dwellings to apartment type dwellings, and part of the reason from that, apart from the intensification of the use of a particular site, is also apartment units tend to have a different look and a different external appearance compared to a traditional single dwelling, or a property that's designed as a single dwelling. In terms of our assessment of looking at this from the context of the neighbourhood plan, first of all, the fact that it's a single dwelling helps. It's not determinative, because as we know, there have been apartments allowed in other locations in the Alwoodley area on sites that were formerly occupied by single dwellings. But in terms of the use of materials and architectural features, such as the use of stone and the use of gables, the use of the proportion of the windows and doors, the fenestration to the ratio of stonework, all those kind of things sort of get into the mix. And whilst this will be a modern design, and whilst it will be a relatively large dwelling, it from our point of view, it's considered to be part of the evolution, because the built environment is not absolutely static. And therefore, in terms of it complying with the Alwoodley policies, we consider that this one does do that. It doesn't introduce, or doesn't attempt to introduce, the use of, for the want of a better term, an ultra-modern design by using non-traditional materials. It's not all glazing and metal in that sense. And likewise, it's not so traditional that it's using timber and like in a Tudor style. So it's striking that balance between those two extremes, really, where the use of the materials, the proportions of the fenestrations and the stonework are considered sufficient for it to comply with the Alwoodley local plan, neighbourhood plan.
Can I just ask for a point of clarification then, either from Mr Newbury or from Philippa? Because Councillor Buckley has chosen not to make a presentation here to us today, and all we've got is just a few words on the page, presumably we can only give little or no weight to any concerns or comments that he has, because we've not heard from him and we've got no detailed explanation as to what he means. in terms of what he said. So we need to give presumably little or no weight to the comments made. Am I correct in that judgment?
Philippa, do you want to?
Sorry, just to unmute myself there. Yes, obviously it's something that has been raised as a concern, so you can give that some credence and consideration in your decision making. But as Councillor Buckley has not come and spoken in objection to the application, he's not here today as a formal objector. He just has the right under the protocol to refer it or refer the matter to plans panel, raise his concerns. And that's why officers have referred it today, because there has been a ward member concern, as is in accordance with protocol. But because he's not actually here to voice those objections, it's not a formal objection that's been raised in any way in relation to this application. And the objections that have been raised are as summarised in the report which you have before you, and they can be given some weight in your when you're weighing up the planning balance in your decision making today.
Thank you for that. And just to add, Councillor Anderson, I did check that Councillor Buckley had the opportunity to speak at panel. And although the cut-off, I think, is the Tuesday, we are usually quite flexible. And right up until this morning, there would have been that opportunity, using my discretion. OK, I see Councillor Smith next.
Thank you, Chair. This is probably more a point of clarity for me, so apologies. There's a current planning application relevant and live for 3 apartments, and I look in at this this dwelling and the design. To me, it lends itself to conversion. So if it were to be converted at any point into those 3 dwellings in a subsequent planning application, would that be brought back before us again, or would it just go through? I appreciate it's a little bit woolly, but just need to clarify it, really.
Thanks for that. But just before I bring the officers in, I personally think that's made quite clear in the report. But since you've asked the question, I'll allow Glenn to answer it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, obviously, as members will be aware, the determination that needs to be made today is what's before you. Your decision shouldn't be made on the basis of what if or what could happen, and I appreciate that you all appreciate that. I mean, I would expect that should we have an application to convert this unit into 3 apartments at some point in the future, there would be input from the local ward members that would encourage it to be reported to plans panel yet again. And again, we would have the same internal discussion as officers as to, because of the history of the site, if that would be appropriate anyway in the absence of ward members' input, should for whatever reason that not occur. It's perfectly possible that it would be, yes. I should also take this opportunity and thank you, Councillor Smith, for kind of reminded me of this, so again apologies for, but we do have at the moment 2 applications on the records which haven't been assessed to any great extent. They've only relatively recently been validated for domestic extensions to this property. They're just currently under consideration, very early days in the determination process. Again, their existence, which is a matter of public record, doesn't or shouldn't influence your decision on the one that's in front of you this morning. But just as a point of clarity, there are currently 2 applications for domestic extensions to the existing property that's on the site at the moment. Of course, as officers, we're not privy to as to how that come about or why that come about, but just for information, that's there for members' information.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Nash. Councillor Anderson, is that your legacy hand? So, Councillor Nash.
Right. Well, am I right in thinking that a previous application, which the panel did turn down, went to appeal and was approved? Its design, its space and bulk is virtually the same as the application is before us. Is that right? So therefore, all we're discussing today, or should be discussing, is the design of the new application. Is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, you're right in asserting that the previous application that was brought to Plans Panel was it was recommended for approval by officers. It was that recommendation was overturned, and then the subsequent appeal granted the planning permission through the appeal process. As I was going through the presentation, I spent a little bit of time on the outlines that the applicant has usefully supplied to us, and members will recall that the one showed that there is a slight increase in the bulk and massing of this proposal compared to that earlier one, particularly to put it in more simple terms. If you imagine standing on the road looking at the application site, the most significant piece of increase in bulk and massing was to the right hand side at first floor level. But as I said, we as officers have looked at that. We've assessed it in relationship to the street scene and the fact that you have got significant protected trees. Not that we're relying on that to screen it, but you have got those significant protected trees on the boundary, and we do not consider it materially significant to justify an amendment or justify a refusal. And so if you take that view, then yes, members are here to assess the impact of a revised building, which actually is a de-intensification of the use of the previous approval that was granted on this site.
Thank you. Is that okay? Yes, Councillor Nash. Any further questions? I see no hands, but just looking down the list, I do. Yes, Councillor Jenkins.
Yeah, just a very quick one, really. Just to say, I wonder, do we actually reply to these objections? I mean, some of the objections in paragraph 13 are sort of incorrect in their assumptions, like it's a 2-story development, not a 3-story development, and there'll be no loss of trees. But I just wondered, do we actually reply to these objections if we agree the proposal at the end? And also the issue of street parking seems to be covered as well within the presentation.
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor. No, the simple answer is no, we don't. We have no formal process in place whereby we go back to objectors and explain or justify our decision if it doesn't resolve or solve their problems as they see. But that's not to say that we don't do that if we are asked subsequent to the decision being made, which happens invariably from time to time with quite controversial proposals. You know, I myself have had conversations or exchanges of emails with objectors following a decision that's been made, but we don't have a formal procedure. The public consultation exercise is not really designed to open up a dialogue. It's there for us to gain people's views and to put those views into the decision-making process along with the consultee responses that we get, and to then come to a conclusion on the basis of all that put together to result in the final recommendation.
Thank you. And I do note that they are covered in the report, and paragraph 49 and 50 do summarise that, of course. And as Councillor Anderson did, you can always ask for further detail on any specifics, as he did earlier. So I've seen Councillor Shamel, but David Newbury's got his hand up as well. David, is it on this point? Do you want to come in now before Councillor Shamel?
Yes, Chair. Yeah, just very, very briefly, just to explain, we don't really have the capacity to reply to individual objections just through the sheer volume of applications we receive and representations we've received. But I suppose the distinction with panel cases is that when we bring a case to plans panel, we do notify all those who've made representations on a planning application that's going to plans panel. And of course, through that process, they'll be able to be notified, or their attention will be drawn to the planning application, the panel report. So they'll see hopefully they'll see the logic of the decision-making process from officers in there.
Thanks, David. Councillor Shamel, your hand's down now. Do you?
Yeah, I still wish to speak.
Okay.
Yeah, still wish to speak. Some of the comments in the report, I mean, there isn't a problem with parking, which is usually an issue, and certainly with off-street parking, there doesn't appear to be a problem. But there have been concerns raised that there is no garaging facility, and I don't know whether that's particularly relevant in this case, but it's certainly not been addressed. Is my first point. And the second one is that there aren't concerns of overdevelopment of this particular site. Now, we've already looked at the footprint. The massing is slightly bigger than it was before, but I'm also confused as to why, if it was the same applicant, and I've no idea whether it was or it wasn't, has had permission to put 3 apartments on there and now gone for a single dwelling. And from what you said, there are also 2 applications in for domestic extensions. So is there a bit of hedging bets going on here? I know it's not relevant to this particular application, but I just find it very confusing.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And yes, I think we would agree with you. We don't know is the simple answer. As I've explained on a number of occasions, there is the possibility that any particular site could have any number of permissions that are valid on it at any particular time. Just because something's already got planning permission doesn't preclude either the same person or another person coming along and seeking planning permission for that site. And it kind of ours is not the reason why. The market forces, no doubt, will determine who becomes the developer of the site, if anybody. And so once, as it were, one permission gets implemented, it largely negates the ability to implement the others unless they start from scratch again. So, you know, in short, we don't know why there's multiple applications on the site. We don't know why the apartment development was not implemented. You know, simple thought process on it would suggest that the 3 large apartments, because they were very large apartments, would be more valuable than a single dwelling. But it may be that other forces other than just the value of the land are at work here that we're not aware of. So I'm afraid we don't know the answer to that question. In terms of garaging, you say obviously it's not dealt with explicitly, but the requirement is to have parking provision, adequate parking provision, and sometimes that's provided by garages and the driveway in front of it, say in a more conventional location or on a smaller plot. Why the developer hasn't gone for garaging in this instance again is not reason for us to question. It's not a strictly speaking planning issue in that sense. The fact that they've achieved a higher parking provision than we would normally expect for a single dwelling house means that from our point of view the scheme is compliant. And apologies, Councillor, I believe that there was possibly a third point that you mentioned.
It's all right, I can't remember it now, don't worry.
But those are the two responses that jumped into my mind in respect of what you said.
Okay, thank you. David, is that a legacy hand from yourself or did you want the yeah. Okay. Any further questions, members? Just look down the list. I see no hands. So just a quick one from me. Just on the environmental side of things, I know it doesn't qualify being one dwelling for EN1, EN2, but I always like to ask officers to encourage an energy efficient build, etc., as much as possible. I think it benefits the environment, and it also will benefit them, I would have thought, in terms of running costs. So would you just comment on that? And also it might be worth, I don't think you mentioned it in your presentation, an additional electric vehicle charging point, I think, that's been introduced.
So yes, Chair, you're very right on that. I think I mentioned the extra car parking space, but then neglected to mention the electric vehicle charging point that the developers offered to provide as well. And those electric vehicle charging points will be secured by condition as per the report as presented. In terms of environmental credentials, of course, the building regulations are largely what will take care of that in this instance, given it's a single dwelling. And I think just to draw to your attention, I've mentioned the loss of 3 trees in my presentation, but as members will be aware from having read the report, we are also imposing a condition that will require replacement of those trees, the loss of those trees, with our 3-to-1 ratio. Now, obviously, they won't be trees that will contribute towards carbon capture for some significant time yet, but given the extent of semi-mature and mature tree planting that's on the site, the overall loss of 3 relatively insignificant trees, and then the replacement of 3 times that amount, has got to be an environmental improvement, if not for the immediate time period, but certainly for medium and long-term future.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, just a quick question and a degree of leniency from you in where I go with this. On paragraph 15, it says that the drainage assessment's required, that can be secured by condition. Fine, happy with that. But we don't. But what I wanted to ask is it germane to know about the drainage on this site just now because of a conversation that we had at Development Plans panel yesterday, and also because of a comment that Mr. Allen made about 2 applications being in the background coming forward in terms of, as an example, so that Mr. Carr and Mr. Newbury can feed it back in again, of this is an example of where maybe drainage might be an issue, and the removal of permitted development rights, if we were about 18 months down the line, might have been an interesting debate and discussions to have as to what would happen. But is it germane at this point that we've not had a drainage assessment, or are officers satisfied that there should be no drainage issues despite us having no report in front of us?
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor. The drainage, as I understand it, has been assessed by our flood risk management team, and I'm not aware that this particular part of Alwoodley has any drainage issues. I know just down the road near to the top end of the Meanwood Golf Club, there are some potential drainage issues there with people concerned about flooding in their back garden. But in this particular part of Alwoodley and Alwoodley Lane, I'm not actually aware that there are any specific issues. So, not being a technical expert on matters of drainage, my assumption would be that from the flood risk management point of view, the replacement of a single dwelling with another single dwelling shouldn't have a material impact on the existing drainage system and its ability to be able to cope with it, and also the potential increase in creeping increase, if you like, through extensions on properties in this area, presumably have been in the expertise of our flood risk management team, such that they don't consider it to be a problem. Because otherwise, if it was, they would have been asking for us to get a drainage strategy up front before we consider granting planning approval.
Okay, I think David's got his hand up as well, so he may be wanting to add to that.
Yes, just to add to what Glenn's said, and just going back to your comments as well, Chair. We could add conditions to this planning permission about the use of porous surfacing for the hard surfacing areas, plus the introduction of water butts. It's something that we often do, but looking down the list of conditions here, we haven't made that, well, we haven't included them or made it explicit. So we could add those if members were minded to grant planning permission. We could add conditions to cover those matters.
Okay, thanks for that. I saw thumbs up from Councillor Nash on that one. Councillor Anderson, do you want to come back? You've got, no. Okay, right. It looks like there are no further questions. So we move to comments. So just again, an opportunity to tell us how you're feeling about this, any concerns, what you think about the conditions, extra conditions or not, and whether you're likely to want to move it or an alternative motion, of course. And we'll hang back till everyone's had the opportunity to make a comment, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Okay then, so hands up for comments. Councillor Nash.
Well, I've thoroughly read the report, and I was amazed that there could be any objection to this, because the design is infinitely better than the design which the panel turned down for the flats. The flat scheme was rather austere, I have to say, but this seems to me to fit in with the general run of houses in the Old Woodley area. So, subject to anybody else disagreeing with what I've said, I'd like to move that we give permission for this.
Okay, thanks for that. We'll hold that for just any other comments. Councillor Smith.
Busy muting and unmuting myself there, Chair. Apologies. Yeah, I mean, it is a lovely looking house, and anybody lucky enough to live there I'm sure would be extremely happy. I voiced my concern as a question, just asking if anything future could come back. But I'd like to take David up on his offer. I'm surprised Elizabeth mixed it out, to add those two conditions in, please, about the porous surfacing and the water butts, just before we do go to a vote, if that's all right. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Any further comments? So I see no other hands. So does any officer wish to clarify anything further? And in that case, David, if you just want to sum up, so with the recommendation, with the additional conditions which seem to be favoured, how would move a motion to that effect? You might cover that, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we've got the officer recommendation subject to the grant, subject to the conditions set out on pages 15 and 16. Councillor Nash has moved permission. Councillor Smith has clarified that by saying that should include the conditions for porous surfacing and water butts. So if members are minded to grant, we'll add those conditions.
Okay, so it's time to formally move it. Councillor Nash was first to indicate she was going to, so would you like to do that, Councillor Nash? That's still the case?
Yes, I formally move that we grant permission to this new dwelling with the additional conditions which Mr Newbury has outlined regarding porous surfacing and water butts to assist with drainage.
Excellent, thank you. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. Just beat Councillor Heselwood to that. Thank you. So we'll now vote on the proposed and seconded motion. So I'll call you by name and ask you to vote. So first of all, Councillor Anderson.
Approve.
Thank you. Councillor Schmelt.
Approve.
Councillor Jenkins.
Approve.
Councillor Midgley.
Approve, Chair.
Councillor Nash.
Approve.
Councillor Sharp,
Approve, Chair.
Councillor Smith,
Approve.
and Councillor Heselwood.
Approve, Chair.
And I also vote in favour to approve. So, Debbie, if you'd just like to summarise the vote, I think it was pretty obvious and clear, but formally do it, please.
It is, Chair. It was a unanimous vote for the permissions to be granted, with the conditions, obviously.
Okay, excellent. And so clearly the motion's been carried. David, I don't think we need to summarise the decision. It's pretty obvious, straightforward and clear. So with that, I'd like to thank members for their participation. Thanks to the subs for getting involved and taking up your time to be here and read the papers in advance. And the next meeting is on the 18th of February. And there could be a couple, sorry, my dog just arrived there. I thought we were going to knock over the table. But yeah, that concludes the meeting. So thanks everybody and see you on the 18th.